Hey, welcome everybody to Pro Mindset Podcast. This is your host, Craig Domann. Today, by way of West Hollywood, we have Nick Halaris. Nick is a multifaceted young man, Stanford Law grad. He has a newsletter and a podcast. His newsletter is Profit Plus. His podcast is the Nick Halaris Show, and he has a real estate empire, and that's called Metros Capital. Nick, welcome to Pro Mindset today.
Craig, thanks so much. Excited to be here. Appreciate you having me on the show.
All right, so we talked a little bit off air. Why don't you share for everyone your story? What's your story? How did we end up? How did you get to a place where you have this portfolio of enormous value in real estate? You obviously got into, I think, getting into Stanford Law School is probably harder than getting out of it. And you also have a podcast and a newsletter that impacts 20,000 plus people.
Yeah, man. I'll try to keep this brief so that we can have a more fun conversation. But I was a young person who was like really ambitious, motivated. And the way that manifested for me was to like be a good student. Like I was like a, all-American student in high school and in college. And that's how I got into Stanford Law, is like just being a study freak and having really good discipline. I mean, people talk about like football 2-a-days. I was at the library like 3 hours twice a day. So I was doing my own version of that, completely different outlet, but same kind of discipline. And so I got really good grades. I got really good scores. And when I graduated law school, I was so infected. Like the baseline motivation for this activity or this work that I was putting in was, man, I wanted to be successful. I had fully bought into the American dream. I wanted to be rich. I wanted to have influence and power and all the stuff that our culture sort of feeds us. And so that's what I went after. I had a few jobs, odd jobs. I never actually practiced law, although I am a lawyer. Had a few odd jobs. I did some consulting. But very quickly got into my own thing. 2 or 3 years after graduating law school, I started investing in real estate. It just so happened that the world had crashed. We had the great financial crisis and real estate around the country was on sale. And so I started buying real estate in like 2009, which is one of the best times in modern history to get started. And so I had that advantage. And since 2009, I've been investing and developing. I've done everything from flip houses to buy foreclosed apartment buildings to build my own apartment buildings. And now I'm doing a sort of diversified range of things, including building high-end homes, own a portfolio of apartments across the country, and have made a success of this entrepreneurial career. And so in some sense, sort of check the box of that younger version of myself. But along the way of that journey, right, like that's sort of the bio, right? If you go to my website or something, that's the bio. But the journey has been anything but smooth. And so I've had all kinds of difficult situations along the way, including, situations that involve me, completely destroying a company that I created because it was fatally flawed in the way it was put together. And I was in business with people that I wasn't aligned with. And that set me back. And these setbacks and these challenges caused me to learn a lot about myself. And those learnings are what motivated me to start doing things like writing the Profit Plus newsletter and producing the podcast, because I really, I spent, of the 15 or 20 years that I've been doing this, I spent 10 of them in crisis mode. And you learn a lot, or you can learn a lot if you try to, if you make an intentionality. I learned a lot about myself and about the world, and I'm just trying to share it and try to steer people in the right direction. And so my newsletter is really about trying to encapsulate that. So the through line, I'm writing about a lot of different things, but the through line is like, how do you go about pursuing the American dream and success without compromising yourself along the way? It's a lot harder than people realize and think, especially when you're young. And I've been writing about that, and it's been a super fun journey, and I hope to continue doing so.
All right, Nick, let's just dive into what is the biggest life lesson you learned about yourself? And let's go pre-crisis to post-crisis. What is different about you? If I didn't know you then, but if I knew you then, how would you show up differently? How do you think differently? How do you respond differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. Tough question to answer, actually, but I'm going to try. I think the biggest mistake that I made as a younger version of myself is that because I was successful in the channels of like academia and school, and I had engaged with a lot of very complex ideas and philosophical ideas and legal ideas, I sort of thought I knew a lot about life and thought I could handle situations. And so I had this sort of overblown sense of confidence, and it was so overblown that I couldn't even really have access to my own intuition. And so the way this manifested for me in a practical sense is that I was so interested in like being an entrepreneur and getting rich that I went into business with people that I knew that I wasn't morally aligned with. I knew it, but I just ignored that. I had this intuition. I didn't listen to it, and I charged headlong into it. And you know what? It wasn't all bad. It's not like these people that I went into business with are evil or something like that. It's just we're not aligned. And that misalignment cost me millions of dollars and 5 or 6 years of legal battles. And the sort of mistake I made was just being too overconfident, assuming I knew everything about human nature, even though I had no life experience to back it up. So that was probably the biggest change, is just sort of understanding, like, having a little bit more humility, or not a little bit more, a lot more humility, and learning how to focus on what's really important rather than just the surface level, like, oh, how much money can I make on this deal? There's actually things that are way more important than that when you're doing business. Like, hey, dude, is this a person that I want to be associated with? Do I trust them? Are they going to make the same decision that I'm going to make when it comes to, a moral question, for example?
Okay, Nick, I've done 200 of these. Never have I had anybody on that's been too confident. You shared that you have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old. You have 2 sons, 7 and 10, and they're going to face and fight and struggle with lack of confidence more than too much confidence most of the time. Where do you draw the line between being confident and being too confident so that it actually backfires on you? Where's that?
Interesting question. Yeah, I feel like there's confidence is something that is of degrees or applied in different areas. So I was confident, and rightfully so, confident in my intellectual ability. I was there's objective measures, right? Like it's like you could take an athlete and just measure this stuff. I was really good at this stuff, and I got good grades and all of the markers along the way. I could handle myself in complex conversations on issues, but I assumed that made me, gave me the right to be confident everywhere else where I had no experience. And so, the mistakes that I made were mistakes that are not really intellectual. It's more emotional. It's about gut instinct. It's about intuition. It's about having an appropriate relationship with my moral compass. And so that's a mistake I made. So I think confidence is a tricky subject because if you're engaging in an athletic competition or a fight, I love martial arts. If you're engaging in that, like, man, you better be confident, because if you're not, it's going to end really badly for you. But I think if I had to give advice, it's about earning the right to be confident in the areas that you need to be. And so there's different ways of doing that. So with sports or athletic stuff or fighting, it's about putting in the work. With school, it's about putting in the work. And with human nature, it's about really getting to know yourself and really listening to yourself and having that sort of internal dialogue at a sophisticated level, so that, like, you meet someone, you say, you know what, that person is not right for me. You have to be able to make that judgment at some point.
Okay, so I've drawn a line of demarcation between belief and confidence. A lot of coaches, a lot of people just use them interchangeable. And I believe that belief is something that is only about you. It's self-belief. It's something that you have to choose every single day. And it's a 100% all in or not. And if you're anything less than 100, you're going to have problems, because if you don't believe in yourself, you set the limits for everyone else to believe in you. So if you walk into a boardroom, a locker room, it doesn't matter which room it is, and you don't believe in yourself, they are not going to believe in you, and they won't even know why. But confidence is about what we do. It's about our skills. And the only way that you can have confidence is through reps. So, like, for example, all these rookie quarterbacks in the NFL, JJ McCarthy had a really good second half of his first game, not so good first half of his first game. We don't know who he is yet. He hasn't gotten enough reps. And so what I'm sensing, and I may be totally wrong, is that on intellectual topics and business, you had a lot of reps. They might have been academic reps, but those reps were very transferable to the real world. But on the moral side, ethics and things like that, you didn't have reps. You're not put in uncompromising situations typically in school, unless it's an essay or some type of fact pattern in law school, and it's never about you. It's always about somebody else. And when you find yourself in the real world in that conundrum where, holy smokes, how do I do this? If you're too confident, but you've never done the reps, you risk the the chance of being wrong. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that distinction. I think it's totally right. I feel like the big questions like the ones that I faced are ones that you almost never have to deal with as a young person. I'm sure there are people that have, people, but the way I grew up, is just not. But what that causes for most people, and I don't think my story is actually really all that unique in a way, because I feel like if you were to survey the startup landscape or the real estate landscape, the majority of businesses that are started by young people get broken up. Like that's the more common story, right? Like even wildly successful businesses, right? Like Facebook, take for example. Facebook has a really nasty start to it, involving, people who owned pieces of it, who ended up having to sue to get their pieces of it back, and intellectual property theft. Like this is what happens when young people engage in these types of activities, because you're naive. You don't really know. You haven't seen enough of human nature. Especially if you kind of go through these like safe tracks that I grew up in. Obviously, America is not the same for everyone, but the tracks I grew up in are, good schools and good family. And, you just don't see people lying and cheating and fighting over money, and doing things that cause businesses to break apart. So yeah, you don't get any reps, and you charge forward trying to get rich as fast as possible, which maybe is not the message our culture needs to be sending young people. That it's okay to take your time, because you'll learn, you'll end up in a better place at the end of the day. Instead of like a lot of people, the super dark side of this American trend is that, man, people end up in jail. Look at these like crypto people, man. They're in jail for the rest of their adult life. Maybe they'll get out when they're older. Maybe they get pardoned by Trump or something, but that's how you ruin your life, is when you really don't have a sense of what you believe in. And then you start dealing with big dollars, and then holy crap, next thing you know, you're on the front page of the news. So it's a dangerous game.
Okay, so let's shift this to, how do you model that for your kids? How do you teach it? How do you share in your newsletter to people about this topic?
Yeah. I've been trying to distill this down more and more. Now, I've been writing it for 5 years. I can't believe it, actually. I've written so many words about this topic. And so I've actually gotten some framework, finally. It's maybe like a page long, but I'll try to summarize it. I'll answer the second question first, and then let's talk about the kids. I feel like the challenge to answer the question, how do you build wealth in American society without compromising yourself along the way? I think it comes down to a number of just like 4 or 5 core principles. The first one is, and this is something that I feel like a lot of the young people that you've interviewed that ended up playing football and maybe not having the career that they wanted to, they learned this the hard way, which is that you really, to make it in this society, you want to position yourself as an owner. Capitalism is fundamentally biased towards owners, and you can make fantastic fortunes working for other people, but man, that's a risky game, and it doesn't work more often than it does work. And so one of the things I've been trying to do with the newsletter is show people all the different ways to become an owner, right? You can start your own business, you can buy a business, you can invest in real estate, you can work for a startup, and rather than earn a salary, earn options and a salary. And so I'm trying to push young people and people of all ages really to like really think about how they're positioned in this economy, because the economy is not fair. It's fundamentally not fair, and it's completely biased towards owners. So step number 1 is be an owner. Step number 2 is you have to practice entrepreneurship no matter what you do. People in America, the entrepreneurial figure is essentially a hero-like figure in American mythology. And the beautiful thing about entrepreneurship is it can be practiced no matter where you go. It can be practiced as an NFL player, for example. And it comes down to a matter of core principles like taking extreme responsibility for everything. You don't blame anything on anybody. You're continuously proactive. You mind the details at extreme levels. You relentlessly follow up on things that need to be followed up on, and you do things that make a difference. And so you figure out like, okay, what is it really? What's important here? Do I need to get another sale, or do I need to get another touchdown? Whatever the thing that makes a difference is what you're focused on. So that's the entrepreneurial mindset. And then the other, switching gears to sort of the other side of the equation, like that's how you build wealth. Be an owner and be an entrepreneur. Whether you're an actual entrepreneur is besides the point. And then how do you do it without compromising your integrity? That's trickier, and it requires much more work, self-work. But the basic ideas there's two basic ideas. Number one is you need to contribute to your community or to your business or to your family more than you extract. And this is sort of the fundamental learning that I had as a young man going through the crisis points that I went through is you can't really live with integrity if you're violating that principle. So even in something like a relationship with your spouse, right? If you're just like take, like, man, that's going to end really badly for you. And the same is true in business and same is true of your team, right? Like if you're on the team and you're just like the guy who's just demanding everything from everyone and wanting all the credit and whatnot, like, man, that's not a leader. Eventually your team is going to turn against you. So that's one principle. And then the second principle is sort of what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, which is, man, you cannot mess with the dark side. Even if you think like I thought, like, man, I thought I was intellectually sophisticated. I could manage people. The dark side is dark and you need to stay away from it. And so there's obvious stuff like don't lie, cheat, steal, pay your taxes. And then there's hard stuff like don't be complicit in something that you don't believe in. Trust your intuition. Don't think you can compartmentalize. If your like teammate or your business partner is out doing crazy stuff at night, that's going to come back and come on you someday. And so you have to be aware of that. And so those are the four sort of big principles that I've been writing about. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there and then we can talk about the kids after that. Like, how am I going to model it for the kids? But what do you think?
Number one, I love it. I've never heard someone summarize like the life of business in 2 minutes. But, being an owner is where it's at. That's why, like, let's just use the NFL. The only person that matters in the room on draft day is the owner. That's why the scouts and the coaches and the front office guys and the GMs can do all this due diligence for over a year. They can have all these comprehensive meetings leading up to the draft. They can have their draft board, and then they have to get the buy-in from the owner, and the owner can do whatever he wants to do, whenever he wants to, because he's the owner. And that's why sometimes teams don't draft the person that they wanted to draft. And you see some consternation on behalf of the general manager or the head coach in these post-draft meetings or press conferences because they don't even know what to say. They're trying to they're scratching their own head while the reporters are asking them these tough questions. They're thinking the same thing the reporter's thinking, like, I don't know. This is not why I got hired. And so being an owner is critical. Then the thing about being an entrepreneur, I mean, let's be real. It doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter what your circumstances are. It doesn't matter if you're an independent contractor, your employee, whatever it might be. If you want to have any measure of control on your own destiny, you have to be an entrepreneur. You have to think like an entrepreneur does. Because too many people in corporate America, they're working 40 hours a week. Some of them are working 60 and getting paid for 40, but most of them are working 30 and getting paid for 40. Because their goal is to spend all their energy focusing on what they can do during the off time and how can they skate out early, how can they leave at lunch on Fridays, and where they're going to go over the weekends. And it's a poverty mindset, keeps you stuck where you're at. And so if you really want to catapult up the corporate ladder, you have to be an entrepreneur inside corporate America. And then as far as the not compromising your integrity, you can't have a genuine relationship, unless both parties give more than they get. I learned this very early in my marriage. I thought it was a 50-50 deal. And the problem was she thought she was given 60 and getting 40, and I thought I was given 60 and getting 40. The math didn't add up. And so I learned over time that it's about giving 100% all the time and doing 100%, being responsible for 100%. And she has to do the same thing. And in business and in partnerships, the same way. And so both parties can have the mindset, I'm responsible for everything. Oh, by the way, my partner just did that for me. That's awesome. That's a privilege. Maybe he's or he or she is the go-to person on that particular responsibility, but you got to be ready to take on the responsibility for everything without stepping on people's toes. And then the dark side is, there's no doubt. I mean, in sports, it shows up in guys that try to cheat the system with, human growth hormones and different things like that. And they get busted at the combine and hurts their draft stock and they get suspended for 10 games and all these things that happen when their intention was to use a cheat code. Everybody wants a great hack or cheat code. My generation did, but your generation is even more than the people younger than you. They spend more time looking for the cheat code than doing it the right way. And that ends up setting you back every time. It's just a matter of time before you're going to get busted. I mean, the NFL, they go drug testing randomly. You don't know when they're going to test you. And masking agents don't work because they test for the masking agents too. So those are my thoughts, is that those 4 pillars are spot on.
All right. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. And I actually think the NFL is a very interesting sort of model of those 4, because they all sort of apply, right? Like the NFL, just listening to some of your guests, like I forget the gentleman who was just recently on the podcast, but he was talking about his experience, playing in the league for just a few years, and then you just get axed and you're left in the winds, and it's not really financially lucrative. Like the NFL is not a place where you're going to be safe. You could be fired at any moment. You could get injured the next day and they'll just drop you. Like this is not a friendly place. And so the ownership thing is like right there. And then when you watch these elite players, the really good ones, the ones that are like leaders, and when they get interviewed, they're practicing all of the things that we were discussing around entrepreneurship and contributing more than you extract, even just in the way they answer their interview questions. So you see these quarterbacks or impact players, the good ones almost always talk about their teammates first, instead of like, oh yes, just taking all the praise for the win or for the play. And so you see it on display in good ways among these elite leaders. And yeah, the dark side is what it is. I mean, NFL, the incentive structure of the NFL is so scary. It probably incentivizes these young kids to take these crazy risks, but it's not worth it. It's never worth it.
And I also think that there's so much gambling going on in our society for lots of different ways, but especially on sports, that it almost gives the guys a false sense of this is another cheat code. So former players, guys, college players bet on the pros bet on college. Not supposed to bet, but everybody's trying to figure out a way, hey, how can I do this and not get busted? And so, obviously Pete Rose never made it into the Hall of Fame because he bet on baseball. But the bottom line is gambling has become an addiction that a lot of young men can't stay away from.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Gambling, the phenomenon, is like one of the worst things that's happening in our culture right now. It's a real problem, and the fact that we're normalizing it is, to me, very concerning. And it's sort of like, from a policy standpoint, it's the worst kind of policy. Like we're taking it and saying like, oh, this is about economic freedom, but it's really taking advantage of people. That's what gambling is giving them an opportunity, giving, people who maybe almost certainly shouldn't be risking their hard-earned financial wealth on this stuff, the opportunity to do so. But it's endemic of the culture of easy cheat codes, like you mentioned. It's endemic of it. It's a perfect example of like our culture gone wrong and everybody searching for the easy way out.
Well, the NFL a couple of years ago started doing alliances and partnerships with casinos and gambling organizations, and it's almost like a two-faced perspective from the players, because it's like you're making money on gambling and yet you won't let us gamble. And I think everybody in the world knows, that has a moral compass of any nature, that you shouldn't bet on your own game. Where we're going with this thing is we're going to have some guys get burnt because they're going to bet on other people's games, and that's prohibited as well. But it's so we have a team in Vegas. We have, fantasy football is kind of a form of gambling, in a lot of different ways. And then we got in-game betting going on all the time. It's the NFL's way of engagement, regardless of the outcome or the excitement or not of the game, because you can bet on the game any time, even if it's a bad game. So it's almost like a form of like sugar, that kids want sugar. All you gotta do is put sugar in anything and they'll eat it. It's like, that's what the NFL's doing to their fans.
Yeah. I know I was watching the games over the weekend, and even the advertisement associated that are playing during game time, there are a lot of gambling stuff. And so they're just trying to feed the beast. The networks are involved in it. The distribution channels are just as guilty as the NFL is playing into this. It's a problem.
Absolutely.
But that's just one version. Like in the business world, there's a influencer investor who recently, like he during the SPAC era, during like the 2022 era, had famously had some really like terrible SPACs that investors lost like 90+% of their money, if not all of it in some cases. And he launched a new SPAC, and he famously wrote something like, "There's no crying in the casino," because he took a lot of heat for all the other SPACs. But I actually think that's, for someone like him, that's the wrong message. It's like, man, people actually Yeah, you got to be a big person and take the risk if you're investing in the stock market. But man, some people lost their money in these deals, and the stock market isn't meant to be a casino. And so it's not the appropriate analogy, in my opinion.
Okay, so let's go to the second part of my question, which is, what we talked off air, that one of the most important roles and hats we wear is being a dad. And so you happen to have two very impressionable boys that, as I mentioned to you, can do anything they want. They can become, there's no limits. It's like there's no brakes on these guys. These guys, if they say, like their teacher, in the fifth grade or whatever it might be, says, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? Write a paper about it. There's no wrong answer. They can do anything. And then you get in the real world and it's more difficult to do some things. But as a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old, you don't know that. They'll look the same. So how are you mentoring and guiding and leading your sons so that they can be successful and not get tripped up by almost culture?
Yeah, I love this question. And I love this line of discussion. One of the podcast episodes that I listened to in prep for this was, you had a gentleman, I forget his name, but he's someone who's like focused on fatherhood and writing and producing content and has a business around, helping dads become better. And when he was telling the story of how he came to that, I almost teared up, because he was talking about, man, the crappy father experiences that he had, the physical violence and stuff. And it was, it really struck me, because I do, man, I look at these kids and they're innocent and they're so vulnerable and they need good fathers. That's what young children need. Good parents, good fathers, good moms across the board. So couldn't agree more that it is the most important mission that I have. I know you've said that before on the podcast. I'm with you. I agree with it. And so I've actually spent a ton of time thinking about it. Part of my impetus to start writing the newsletter was actually prior to writing the newsletter, when my first son was born. And I was at the tail end of this crisis that I was in. I wrote like 100 pages of life lessons for him, my first son. I wrote it before he could even walk, and I still have it. I haven't, shared it with him yet because he's only 10, but it was in reaction to this impulse that I felt, which is that as soon as he was born, or as soon as I knew he was coming, it like completely changed my perspective on life in terms of, what I was here to do. I wasn't here to get rich and fulfill the American dream. It's to be a good father. And so I agree with that 100%. To answer the question, what I've been trying to do, because a lot of the topics that you and I have been talking about, they're a little bit farther advanced than my kids are. And so I'd love to actually hear your perspective on it when I finish answering this. But what I've been trying to do is actually talk to my children about the decisions that I'm wrestling with in business, for example, and walk them through my thinking on it as a way to just show them, like, hey, here's the issue that came up. Here's the choices that I faced. And here's how I evaluated that choice. And I don't do it near as much as I should, but occasionally I'll remember to do it, when we're in the car together on our way to the next birthday party or sporting event. And I think it's reaching them. I can tell, that the messages are there in the way that they conduct themselves at school and sports and stuff. But I'm going to keep going. But what do you think? How would you approach it? You've got older kids than I do.
Well, even at 7 and 10, I think a big thing is awareness, helping them understand that they tell themselves a story. Maybe when they get called on in class or a friend puts them on the spot, they talk to themselves and they don't even realize they're talking to themselves. And they're either saying something like, you got this, you know this, you prepared for this, or I hope they like me. I'm stupid. It's a negative voice. It can go both directions. And so what I find is that we're not really aware that we have this inner voice. I call it a pocket voice, until we're in that big moment. Let's say, for example, let's just use the sport of basketball. There's one time in every game, it happens multiple times, where everybody in the arena is looking at you, and you have the ball in your hands, and literally everybody's watching you. And it's when you're shooting a free throw. And so when you're shooting a free throw in the first quarter or first half, and the game's really not, it's 2-2 or something, it doesn't matter. So that pocket voice doesn't say anything to you. But if there's 2 minutes left and you're down 2, or let's say you're down 1, you got 2 shots and you make both, you might put your team in a position to win. That's when your pocket voice still whispers to you, but it whispers louder, and it tells you your true feelings about who you are more than what you do. So it attacks who you are, not the shooting of the free throw. And so just helping your sons be aware that they have this voice, it's very normal. And that if they don't like what it's saying to them, they can reprogram it. And that if they love what it's saying to them, keep doing it. And so that begs the question, how does your inner voice, how does that become negative? How does some people have it positive? And the same person could have moments where in social settings, it's negative. In academic settings, it's positive. So it's not just like, it's not like AM and PM, or AM and FM. AM's against me, FM's for me. It's not universally applied to every situation you're in, but it's either one or the other, AM or FM. So what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that completely just from my own experience. I was actually something as an athlete that I struggled with was that I had a really negative inner voice when I was a younger person. And even actually into adulthood. And only recently, this is part of the slow maturation process of a male. It takes a long time for a male to like figure it out. Only recently has the character of that inner voice like really turned in a positive direction. There's almost no situation that I go in life where that like nasty version that I experienced as a young person comes out and made me feel nervous or made me feel like I'm not good enough or something. But yeah, I don't know if you've seen this kids movie, but there's a phenomenal kids movie called Inside Out 2 that's about this exact subject. The writers of it absolutely nailed it because the character essentially is like a young kid, 10, turning into, going into their teenage, so going through puberty in the story. And inside her brain, the story is about actually the characters in her brain, so the different emotions. And the emotions turn against her and develop a new automatic thought. It goes from like, life is beautiful to I'm not good enough. And the movie is about her reckoning with the emergence of this new voice, this new inner voice, that's default mode is I'm not good enough, which I personally, man, I've felt that to the core myself. I went through that exact experience. And yeah, I think it's super like common. My experience is super common. My wife actually presents a counter argument. I don't know what was different about her upbringing, but I don't think she's ever felt that. She just she's got like alligator blood. She's never nervous. She always thinks she's going to win. It doesn't matter what game she's playing. She thinks she's going to win. And she has this incredible tight connection between, like you mentioned earlier, the belief and the confidence. And so I've watched my own sons kind of grow up. They're still on the young age, but I can tell that my oldest son, he may have inherited inherited via DNA or from being around his mom and I think he inherited his mom's version of it because when he steps on the court, he's just like, there doesn't seem to be any nerves in him. And the younger one, I'm not sure yet. He's still only 7, but it's a fascinating subject for sure.
Well, one of the things to be aware of as a dad is when you see that shift, because a lot of times, especially in sports, or sometimes kids are just bigger, faster, stronger, just genetically, they run into a little bit of a brick wall and they don't see themselves the same way they saw themselves. And I did this. My son that made it to the NFL was always a step ahead of most of the kids his age. So, of course, being a dad, I'm like, we got to move him up. So we moved him up and put him on an older basketball team. And out of 9 players, he was number 9. And I can remember my wife and I both laugh about it. We drove an hour one way to watch him sit on the bench and not play. And by the end of the season, he was number 5 and he started in number 9. But here's what happened. He was an offensive-minded player before that season. During that season, his teammates and his coach convinced him that he wasn't worthy to shoot. So after that season, he was a defensive player. And so when he got in high school, he was a defensive player because he lost his confidence in his right to shoot. Because every time he was open in the game, when he was in the game, his teammates didn't throw him the ball. They didn't pass him the ball. And if they did, they wanted it back and they would, tell him, hey, bro, give it to me. So I think one of the things you have to be mindful of is too much competition too soon, too much adversity too soon. And give your sons a small dose of adversity so that they can learn how to overcome it, because I believe it's a skill and most people don't have that skill. Every time they face adversity, they pivot. Every time a business deal, they just quit. They just go, oh, it's not going to work. In life, they're pursuing a career. It's too hard. Got to change majors, change schools, whatever the case may be. The best gift you can give your kids, besides being positive and believing in themselves, is the toolbox with a few tools that they've got to develop themselves on how to overcome adversity. Thoughts on that?
I think it's great advice. And just from my own life, I couldn't agree more. I feel like one of the problems of growing up the way I did is where it was like, look, maybe struggled socially at times, but I never had any big adversity. I was lucky, man. I grew up in a good situation and happened to be good at what I needed to be good at. But that didn't prepare me in the right way for the real life, which is this is hard. And you're going to deal with some difficult people. You're going to deal with some difficult situations. You're going to deal with things that are completely out of your control, that can be terrifying and can be devastating, can crush you, make you like really question everything. And the sooner you learn how to engage with that kind of emotion, that kind of energy, the better. And so I agree with it. And one of the things I was just doing with my kids, I didn't actually do this until I was in my late 20s, is I started doing martial arts. And I feel like that is a very interesting, discrete simulation of what you kind of describe what happened with your son, which is that every single class, the kids go up and spar against somebody else and they lose a lot. And I've actually watched them kind of process it. And I actually think it's helping them in the exact way that you and I are discussing now, which is like, okay, they got these emerging egos, which are comparing with each other, like you mentioned earlier, like everyone's comparing, and then they get submitted or they get dominated in jujitsu. Like that's a different experience. And I actually never had that experience until it was literally late 20s. And I actually think I would have been better off had it happened to me in high school or even younger, like my kids are. So couldn't agree more. And I love the idea of doing even more of it, simulating that adversity as much as possible.
Well, you being an academic person, primarily an academic person and excelling in academics, I'm sure you can relate to this. Like your English teacher didn't say, hey, there's 2 minutes left. Give it everything you got. Make sure and go back and review and make sure you got a good theme and all the things are related and connected. Same thing in math, whatever it might be. And in sports, that's the beautiful thing about sports and competition is coaches sticking his foot up here, to say, let's go, let's go time. And so I think kids need a mixture of this academic arena and this competition arena. Doesn't have to be sports. It can be musical theater, it can be, chess club, it can be anything. And where there is a winner and a loser, most teachers, they make an exam that's too tough and no one gets above, 75%. What do? Oh, we're going to grade it on a curve. Okay, everybody got 75%. You guys got A's. So now everybody gets A's and B's. When everybody got C's and D's. Guess what happens in sports? If you stink, you stink. If you're running a track meet and, hey, you're running against the wind half the time, but let's just say it's a cross, it's throwing everybody off, and everybody's times are horrible. They do not change the times. They are what they are.
Like that, man. My kids are fully in the participation trophy era of competitive sports. And my wife and I have actually been actively working to undo any of that programming, because it's crazy. The environment that exists, at least out here in Los Angeles, but I think it's nationwide. I mean,
It is.
Yeah, it's really just, concerning, let's just say, because life doesn't work that way. There are objective measures, there's winners and losers, and oftentimes like you don't deserve the trophy. If you didn't win or you didn't play hard or whatever you did, it just it's a weird cultural phenomenon. I sort of feel like it's reversing a little bit. Like if I poll the parent friends of mine, I actually think they're all kind of on the same page about it. The culture's just trying to catch up, I think. I think it hasn't quite got there. Maybe this is a turning point that like the recent history, but we'll see. What do you think?
I think participation trophies are fine maybe when they're like 6, but I think at some point in time, it's like we talked about. Why is being an entrepreneur fundamentally and being an owner? Those are the first 2 fundamentals you talked about. Neither one of them have anything to do with participation. It's all about winning. It's all about being in control, having some authority over your destination. And when you win, when there's competitions where you win and lose, you learn the feeling of being an owner. You also, when you lose, you learn the feeling of not. And those are good feelings because that's what capitalism is built on. And you're either working for someone or someone is working for you.
Yeah. And what I've realized just observing culture is that if you look at basically any collection of human beings attempting to do something, whether it's business or sports or military, The people who lead those things, those organizations, they all act like entrepreneurs. It's a mindset. When I first got into podcasts, I was obsessed with listening to like interviews of Navy SEALs, for example, or elite military figures. And after listening to 5 or 6 of them, man, the pattern was so clear. It's people who aren't taking orders. These people are actually taking complete responsibility for themselves and their teams, and they're making decisions and waiting to be told to stop. They're not like waiting for someone to tell them what to do. It's literally the exact opposite of what you think of when you think of military, which is like, hey, it's a bunch of order followers. That is not what's happening in the elite levels of military, at least from what I can tell. And that's true of teams and stuff like that as well.
Okay, so where my mind is going is I want you to think back to that day. It might have been the hardest day you've lived so far from a business standpoint, not from a family standpoint or, losing loved ones or anything like that. And when you hit rock bottom, there was that rock bottom day. You might have hit rock bottom multiple times, but I want you to pick the lowest of the lows. How did you recover? What was your, everybody's got to have even the Bible talks about you got to build it on rock, not on sand. Okay. What was your rock that allowed you to springboard from that low point? And I'm not looking for anything in particular. I'm just curious where your brain takes you.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I remember it. This is something I could never forget. It was my oldest son's first birthday. And so it was a Friday, and I was really looking forward to taking him there's this local restaurant we used to always go to, and all the people who worked there knew him. And we used to sit at the bar we had this seat that you could screw in, and, they always like make pizza for him and stuff like that. I guess at that time he probably wasn't eating pizza yet, but I was looking forward to that and, trying to get through the week. And at this point in my life, I was already kind of in a mess. I was in the process of breaking up my first company because of a partnership dispute and in multiple lawsuits. And I had investors who were very nervous, some of them, downright angry. And there was a possibility that they might get involved in these lawsuits because they had all this money to lose. And so it's this crazy situation. And right around lunchtime, there was a knock at the door. And just to add insult to injury, these investigators showed up. These criminal investigators showed up to investigate. They were in the middle of investigating me for a crime. Now, this is a crime that I didn't commit, but it was involving the business that we're talking about. And it really rocked my world, man. I have a 1-year-old son, and never in the younger version of myself would I ever think, man, I'm going to be investigated. Just to be investigated for a crime is to me, the ultimate mistake. Thankfully, that all worked itself out. I was able to clear my name of any of it, but talk about low, sitting there with my son at his birthday, worrying about whether I'm going to have to testify in court, in a criminal court of all things. And meanwhile, I got this lawsuit and all these financial concerns. And so I'm sitting there, I have this noble intention. This is when I was writing all those pages to my kids about what life is supposed to be like. And what got me through, honestly, was fortunately along the way, I had developed some really good habits. The two main ones being, I woke up early and I journaled. I read deeply and I journaled. And in the process of this, following my curiosity, I came across the exact sort of philosophical and spiritual material that I needed to make it through that. And so literally a few months prior to that day, I had come across these mystical teacher who actually taught at Berkeley. His name is Eknath Easwaran. And I devoured a bunch of his books. And one of Easwaran's teachings was about the importance of orienting your life around making a contribution for the greater good. And so in that moment, when myself and my ego was under full attack, everything I ever believed about myself was under attack, I was able to grab onto this spiritual principle, which is that, man, the true good life is the one where you can live for others. I grabbed onto that for dear life. And that got me through. That got me through and has led me down a totally different path in life and has motivated my writing and podcasting and even, my business today. My business is completely different today because of my discovery of this idea and my embracing it. And the crisis is what brought it.
That is really your principle number 3 of your framework. That's the basis of that is, doing things for others, giving more than you're getting, all those types of things. We talked about at the beginning, the importance for men or the impact for men of having kids. Why don't you share for everyone how having kids has changed your perspective and has changed your life?
Yeah, completely changed it. I've written a lot about in my journal, how the kids actually sort of saved me in a way, because I was down this path where I was just pursuing my own success and not really thinking that much about other people. And I think that's actually common for men in particular. I think females actually come equipped with a little bit more of a brain around their connection with other people. And so it's not like I was outwardly some like selfish person and I didn't know how to be a friend. It's not that. It's sort of like a blindness or an unconsciousness about the way that you show up in the world and the way that you impact other people, what you say, what you don't say. Do you offer support? Do you listen? Do you actually listen to other people? Those kinds of things. It shows up in these subtle ways, but they're actually really important. And so the kids, for me, were like a massive wake up call to really embody a different kind of being. And I feel like I say this all the time to my dad friends for sure, man. I feel like I would have never become, a man had I not had children. They really just shocked, woke me up and made me think about life in a completely different way. And when I encountered these spiritual principles, like I had encountered those principles before. Like if you pick up any religious text, any philosophical text or moral philosophy text is right there. But when you have children, you actually feel it. You're like, okay, now I know what that means. Like when you have a kid, you have this instinct, this genetic instinct to do whatever you can to support them. And so that for me provided the physical, emotional connection with that idea, which before was just an idea, but then I felt it. I'm like, man, now I know what that feels. And so really it enabled me to work my way out of this crisis without losing touch with myself and made me a better man, 1,000%.
Okay, let's go back to your framework. And this is my final question. You've been wonderful, by the way. A lot of fun.
Thank you.
A lot of fun, very very intellectually stimulating to have this conversation today. It may be in your 4 core principles, but it may be something, maybe a subtitle. If there's someone out there right now that's stuck, they're in a situation where they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. They can't see the end, the treasure at the end of the rainbow. They don't have the vision. Vision is critical for business. Vision is critical for success, sports and business both, and life. If somebody is like, they've got blinders on, they can't see it. What is your antidote for helping somebody get some inertia, get some movement going to the next best first step?
Yeah, I love this question. It's one I've actually thought a ton about, because one of the interesting things that's happened to me over my life is that for whatever reason, people have always reached out to me. People in that situation. I can't tell you, like not a month goes by where somebody in my life doesn't reach out to me with sort of that exact question. They're facing some kind of moral conundrum or relationship problem or just like a motivation problem. And so this has happened to me over and over again. And it wasn't until really recently, until the last 5 years of doing this work with Profit Plus and publishing and really thinking about these questions, that I actually think I have a decent answer for it now. In the past, I've made a lot of mistakes, like offering advice that wasn't that great. It wasn't terrible advice. It's all pretty good intention stuff. But now I have a different perspective on it, which is that I actually think the key to that person, if you're struggling, is actually to get really practical about what you're doing with your daily life. And what I recommend to people is, I would sort of look at their life and try to evaluate, like, how are they spending their time? And I feel like there's 3 or 4 core things that people need to do to get themselves back on the right track. Number one, actually, my number one first step for people actually is to establish some kind of rigorous discipline of exercise. That is so useful in sort of reasserting control over your mind. That's my number one step for people is to do that. But it's not enough. Like that will get you like really far, like down the road of getting better in touch with yourself. But there's a couple other things you need to do. And then the next thing I recommend to people is, like, you've got to start some kind of awareness or consciousness practice. And so a lot of people jump towards meditation, but it doesn't have to be meditation. It can be just going on a walk without your cell phone, like just something that draws you to the moment on some regular basis, just like exercise. Do it for 30 minutes a day. And then the third thing I recommend, and this is essential, is that you journal every day. And this is really hard for people, but it's the most important thing you can do along the path of like figuring out what you want to do with your life. And journal every day, no matter how awkward it feels, and have an awareness practice and have a physical discipline practice. And you are going to learn a lot about yourself, and you're going to unstick your mind and bring clarity to your life. And then the fourth thing is, man, reach out to people. I made the mistake in life, especially during this crisis, because I was embarrassed by a lot of it, is I didn't talk to people. And I wish I had talked to more. And because the times I did, it really helped me. I was so in a self-judging mode during a lot of that time. And when you talk to people, you realize that you're being too hard on yourself most of the time. And so that's the fourth thing, is find some good mentors. They don't even have to be mentors, just friends. Tell them what you're going through, and you'll find some different perspectives that will be helpful to you. So those are my 4 ideas for people in that position.
I love that because I agree with it. I think putting that together in a daily routine, like a morning routine, you could almost do all 4 of those as a part of your morning routine.
Yep.
Where you're up, you're working out, you're doing meditation, you're doing some type of consciousness, you're journaling about, you can journal anytime. Most people journal in the morning or in the evening. Probably more people in the evening because they want to, recount what happened and how they felt and all those types of things. But I think that if you get up every day and you look at your cell phone and you start getting into social media or emails or text, you've lost that day. You've lost control of your day. I've done it many times. But if you get up and you have a plan of what you're going to do for self-care, whether that's physical exercise, whatever it is, you can do quiet time, prayer time, you can do meditation, you can do cold plunging, you can do a lot of different things, but you got to do something, and you got to be consistent about it, intentional about it. And it's almost like it's mirrors saving money. If you don't keep the first nickel, the first dime of every dollar you make, at the end, you have no money. At the end of every day, if you don't take the first hour of your day for you, you lose your day. You have nothing at the end of the day. Because all you do, at least my experience, is I'm a really good firefighter. I just put out fires all day. I solve other people's problems. I put other people's situations as a higher priority than mine because it's right here in front of me. Or if I take that first hour, sometimes I take 2. I am in control of my day. And when I'm in control of my day, I'm in control of my life.
Well said, man. I couldn't agree more. Like the morning routine is sacred time. Everyone should prioritize it. I have a crazy schedule. I get up at 3:30, and I do almost from 3:30 to 7 a.m. is my morning routine. I do all of those things in that time period and more because it's a long time, but it sets me up for success. And one of the things that, like I experienced early in my career is that our sort of system, our culture is designed to sort of trap you into being that firefighter. And so even the academic system where I was really successful, the end goal of that academic system is for you to be an order taker at a corporation or a law firm. It's not for you to be an entrepreneur. And that's one of the bugs or the features, depending on how you look at it, of capitalism, is that there's this incredible incentive system of capitalism for owners to kind of remain owners and everyone else not. And so that's why that exists in our society. And what I really have been trying to do with my, mentorship of other people and with the newsletter is just try to wake people up to that. Because you wake up, you don't take any time for yourself, you get yourself ready, you drive to work. There is not a chance that you're going to discover what you were meant to do in this life. And that's the tragedy. The tragedy is if you don't discover what your purpose is, or your many purposes, because we're human beings, we're complex. And so we have a lot of different things. But for sure, you'll know, man, if you spend 10 hours a day doing someone else's work without taking a moment to even consider what you like or what you care about, that's dangerous.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Nick Halaris. Nick, besides the show notes, where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Would love anyone can sign up for the newsletter for free at nickhalaris.com, and would love to have you. And if you sign up, please reach out. I respond to anyone and everyone who emails me with questions, and would just love to have members of this audience be a part of the newsletter community.
Nick, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation, man. Thanks for all the time.
You're welcome. Hey, it's Craig Domann, the host of Pro Mindset Podcast. I want to thank you for listening or watching today's show. And you can catch us every week on the normal social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and all the listening podcast platforms. I hope you enjoyed today's show, and more importantly, I hope you gained a pro mindset insight. Please be sure to rate and review Pro Mindset Podcast, and I look forward to catching up with you on our next show.